The organization that Neville can never remember is called the Mojave Desert and Mountain Recycling Authority.
Oh.
All right? That's who we are today. We were actually created with a different name called Integrated Waste Management Authority, which was a buzzword back 20 years ago when we got started. But nobody really knew what that meant, and finally the board agreed that we should call ourselves what we are. We focus on recycling. We deal with landfills, but we don't own landfills, we don't operate landfills. And I will explain a little bit about us. To get started, there are 9 members. The Joint Powers Authority, basically in California, local governments share common authorities, and this group shares all its authorities to do solid waste activities. We could run collection programs, contract for collection programs. We could operate landfills if we chose to, hazardous waste operations. So it's 9 jurisdictions, everybody but the city of Hesperia, 15,000 square miles, over 400,000 people. We financed 20 years ago the Victor Valley Materials Recovery Facility. Vinny, we've had some of the members.
I know about this
guys
project,
have had that chance, and you're welcome to see that. We also have a new video online that explains the whole operation. It's a 5-minute video and takes you through the operation of the recycling facility. Basically, it's a manufacturing facility. We make bales out of recycled material that people put in their blue containers or in their commercial recycling containers. We run a market development zone to try to use material locally to create jobs and businesses. We have a group of volunteers, the High Desert Master Composters. We train people in backyard composting with a free workshop, and then the people who want to stay involved, we have 5 different groups because we're so spread out. We have 5 different groups that they can be involved with, and they help us with events. They do special projects around the communities. I put those 3 C's down at the bottom, commingled, commercial, and compost, because that's what we're starting. That's our real focus. Commingled recycling means residential material, blue can around here, that where all the recycling goes in one container, it comes to our recycling facility and we separate it. Commercial recycling is the big hurdle that we're working on right now to get more businesses recycling. We just started a program last year where we're giving decals and certificates to businesses who participate in that. And we had over 1,000 businesses across the region that are part of local recycling programs. We've been visiting each one of them to recognize what they're doing. And compost is the big deal. And what I'm gonna do is kind of give you that 25-year perspective from the beginning to where we are and where we're going, because that's where you people are gonna go. I'm there. I'm not gonna go much further than where I've been, but you guys are gonna be going a lot further. And Neville's so right about how much Americans throw away and consume. If the rest of the world lived to our standard of consumption of materials, there we would need 4.5 Earths to sustain that. Okay? We consume 9 times the Earth's ability to supply us. Okay? And the only reason it would take 4.5 Earths is because many countries are far below our level. But it's not sustainable, and materials is a part of it, energy is a part of it. I'm going to show you how it's beginning to all get woven together into sustainable activities. But before 1989 in California, and we were working together then as a group up here on issues about San Bernardino County landfills, that California had one recycling bill, beverage container bill. You still get that deposit, you pay a nickel, you get a nickel back. That was pretty much it in California before 1989. 90% of our discards ended up in landfills. At least that was the best estimate. Because after 1989, the state adopted this hierarchy where we looked at the preferred uses of materials. Source reduction and reuse. Just don't throw it away. Don't get it in the first place. Keep using it. Repair it. Then recycling and composting, energy recovery, and disposal. So this hierarchy became integrated waste management. Okay? In California, technically, energy recovery and disposal are at the same level, but you know, we're still sorting that out. But the recycling, the composting, the reuse, and reduction is much higher. But California, then the legislature and the governor agreed on a bill that's actually AB 939, the Integrated Waste Management Act, signed by a Republican governor, which probably may not happen today. But there was something called diversion. Okay, diversion was the word. So we were asked to, or told that local governments we were required to divert 50% of what we generated, what we created by the year 2000. Okay, so we had from 1990 to 2000, we had an interim goal of 25%. So in 10 years, we had to divert 50%. Well, diversion was everything that's generated minus disposal. Okay, so you get this disposal number and a generation number, and the difference was diversion. And then you would calculate your diversion rate by dividing the numerator denominator. Okay, so generation is recycling and disposal. You take away disposal and you get diversion. Okay? It's a pretty simple formula. Didn't really work real well, you know, because again, you get a numerator that's your recycling, and then the denominator is recycling plus disposal. So the bigger the numerator got, the bigger your recycling rate got. And people got really creative about counting generation, counting what was recycled. You know, who wears a pair of shoes one time and throws it away? Okay. Well, you know, what's the life of a pair of shoes? And when does a pair of shoes become reused rather than a pair of shoes? And it was stuff like that that created these recycling rates, but nonetheless, we made some progress. I'll show you in a minute. So recycling includes composting, source reduction, you know, everything that keeps stuff out of landfills. There was a system to report the origin. Every time somebody goes into a landfill, they tell where this stuff came from. And so we have pretty good figures on disposal. We knew where it was coming from. This chart shows what happened in California for diversion rates. So up here on this axis, there's your 50% mark, has to about 2004, a little late getting there, and then the red and blue line are because the method of counting changed, went to per capita rather than diversion rate. But nonetheless, there was pretty steady progress. Okay, so you know that looks pretty good. We moved along, made big jumps just before 2000. You know, hit the 25%, well, right around 1995 is when we're supposed to finally got up over 50%, hit the 60s. But there were problems because it was really how much it counted, how much was generated, not really, did the disposal go down? I'll show you another chart in a minute. It didn't go down. It went down for a while, then it started climbing again, and it started climbing faster than the diversion rate. Either we were generating a whole bunch more stuff, or we were just playing with the numbers. So the state changed to per capita disposal measure, which is a better way of doing it. The disposal information is actually more accurate. We know how much goes into landfills, and we have a pretty good idea where it came from. We know how much came from out of landfill, and how much came from Lucerne Valley. We know how much came from Neville's house, because we tracked it. But there's no more diversion rate measurement. It's all per capita disposal now. But it shifted the focus, because now we're looking at disposal. It was supposed to give us a chance to shift the focus away from this diversion numbers game to programs and actual recycling and reduction of disposal. That was the intent of this SB 1016. And so there's two things to note here. You can forget the red and blue. Red is residential, and the green is the per employee. So you know, it's like how much per resident, how much is totally generated for the number of employees. Those are the factors that we look at. But the blue line shows actual total disposed tonnage. So you can see from 1989, 1990, down to 1996, when you hit that 25%, disposal was going down. You know, recycling rate was going up, disposal was going down. That's the way it was supposed to work. But then the recycling rate kept going up, and disposal kept going up. Okay, some wasn't working right. And so those of us who follow numbers noticed that, and we knew we were missing something. So the state came up with this per capita disposal. We're going to measure everything on per capita disposal and this big convoluted thing. But what happened right after they adopted that in 2008, there was a recession. Okay? And so per capita disposal just crashed, and it really hasn't come back. Okay, so you're going to hear as you work in this field or even casually observe the field, you hear about diversion rates and recycling rates. And it's numbers, it all counts. But if you want to keep stuff out of landfills, you measure disposal. Okay, and so there were mistakes made by trying to measure recycling rates. Oregon does a better job. Oregon tracks recycling. They know really what moves and where it moves. They've got a much better sense of what their recycling rate is. It's always been below California's, and most of the nation laughs when they hear what our recycling rate is. So now we've got a new bill, AB 341. It was approved in 2011. Sets a 75% statewide recycling goal. So remember, the 50% was local. Vickville had to reach 50%. Atlanta had to reach, Apple Valley had to reach 50%. San Bernardino County had to reach 50%. And we put in programs, but we also tweaked numbers. 75% recycling statewide. It's not a local requirement. It's not like having a local diversion rate. This is statewide. Some good things. Needles, 5,000 people, 100 miles from another city in California, down on the border. They have the same requirement as Los Angeles. Needles creates the same amount of trash that Los Angeles does probably in the first 5 minutes of January 1. And yet they have the same requirement. Now it's not a local requirement, it's statewide. And the state agency, CalRecycle, the Department of Resource Recovery, has to look at what they're doing and come up with improvements to what they're doing and find new strategies to hit that 75% goal. They were supposed to report to the legislature last January on how to do it. They didn't get that report in. It's still not there. I asked today on a call about it, and people have stopped asking about it. So, in Sacramento, there's a lot of pushing and pulling and a lot of, there's a difference between politics and politicians. Politicians is a French word that has a whole different meaning. Politics is policy. Politics, in the Greek term, is a polis. It's a community. It's what we do. So sometimes the politicians get in the way of the politics, and that report has not seen the light of day. But we've seen the drafts, and I'll talk about it. Because what we need to do to reach 75% recycling, we need to stop landfilling 22 million tons a year. Okay, 22 million tons. It's a lot of material that we have to keep out of landfills. And the clock is ticking. It's less than 6 years to go now to do that. And the measurement, I showed you that statewide recycling rates. That has been recalculated, and the statewide recycling rate is below 50%, which is probably where it should be. In fact, it's probably generous to be at 49. But to get to 75, it's basically taking half of what's going into landfills right now, taking that out, and composting it and recycling it. And the big chunk of it is organic material plus inert, what's called inert material, C&D, sorry, the acronym, construction material, stuff that's heavy and shouldn't be in there in the first place. And then we need to get more of the traditional recyclables that have value, paper, bubble, cans, plastic. So we're going to do source reduction, recycling, and composting. There's this term anaerobic digestion that, if you want to ask about it, I can explain it. It's basically a controlled decomposition of organic material to capture methane and convert it to natural gas, and then take the remaining portion and compost it if you're doing it right. And so that's how we're going to get to 75%. We're not going to get there by numbers. That's what's in the law. So the first step, according to the state, in their draft plans, that never quite, it was out there in October, never quite got to us in January. But move organics out of landfill. That's number one. Move the organics out. I'll show you why in a minute. Keep the beverage container recycling program. The beverage container program is so successful that it's collapsing because of its success. When the state recycling rate for beverage containers hit 72%, there wasn't enough money left to administer the program and fund all the ornaments that have been hung on the tree, the various grants and payments, incentive payments, and all these things that got the program. When it hit 72%, There wasn't enough money. It's at 90%. It's running a structural deficit of $100 million a year, and the only reason it hasn't yet collapsed is because there was the years before they were at 72%, they accumulated a big surplus of money. So that needs to be resolved, and it needs to be resolved within the next year, probably. Get a recycling manufacturing infrastructure. We're sending valuable recycling all over the world, particularly to China and Pacific Rim. But our stuff is it's traded, it's a commodity. We can keep it here. California's big enough. We can keep it here. We know how to recycle plastic in California. We need to be able to do that, keep the value here, and stabilize our markets. If our markets are in China, and we had an experience a year ago when the Chinese government started to really increase customs inspection, and it was hard to get stuff through there. And some people were afraid to ship because they didn't want to be in prison in China for illegally shipping unspecified material into China. Changed a lot of stuff, but it told us that if you rely on someone else to handle your material, you're at risk for that. We're also exporting jobs and we're exporting value, so we can keep it here, and that's a big part of what we want to do. That market development approach. Assist with financing and permitting assistance. The state always talks about assisting with permits. I think this time they're serious about it because they're not going to get to 75%, and the obligation is on the state agency to get there. That's going to change some minds real quickly. But we're also getting help with financing, and I'll explore that in a minute too. So includes funding local programs, and that term materials management is a new term. You'll hear that term over time. It has a very specific meaning. And the last slides I'll show you talk about materials management. But it is how to change the way we funded things. When we started 25 years ago, it was all landfill based. You paid somebody to bury your stuff in the landfill. Okay? Now we're selling material. We're selling recyclables. Okay? There's money being generated. And as you remove organic material from landfills, you reduce methane generation. You reduce the greenhouse gas. You get a carbon offset from keeping that out. So there's value to doing that in new economies. So there's a lot of rethinking that we need to do. Get the state to do a better job buying products with recycled content. We still can't get Caltrans to use rubber on highway repaving jobs. Arizona, 80% of Arizona highway paving is done with rubberized asphalt, tires that are ground up and put into asphalt. California is somewhere around 10 to 15%. When Caltrans buys mulch, they go to the low bidder, and they've been buying mulch from Utah more than from California generally. So we need to change that mindset. And then this thing about extended producer responsibility. So if someone manufactures a product that's toxic or dangerous or hard to handle, who should pay to handle that product when it's at the end of life? Should it be the public? Should you have to pay for it in your rates? Or should the manufacturer bear some responsibility? So that's called extended producer responsibility. That's a debate that's going on. It's really intense. There's big models up in British Columbia that are trying a huge approach to that. And we're going kind of material by material, batteries, paint, oil, tires, and mattresses, and trying to handle extended producer responsibility. So we need to get that new manufacturing in California to get to 75%. We are not going to ship food waste across the Pacific to China. That's not going to happen. Okay? We're not going to put it in containers and take it to the port and let it sit and get on a boat and go to China and be inside a closed container for a month and then have the Chinese open it up. It's not going to happen. Okay? We need to do that here. We're not going to ship concrete to be ground up and made into road base. We got to do that here. But we could bring back some of those other materials. So we need that manufacturing. We have to have a manufacturing infrastructure, or we're not going to get to 75%. And hopefully, in the process, we can bring some value back with it. There are new jobs can be created, over 100,000 new jobs if that 22 million tons is kept in California. 100,000 new jobs. There are greenhouse gas benefits. About 11 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents per year by reaching the 75%. If you know, you've been looking at greenhouse gas issues, 11 million metric tons is a big amount. it's a good slug, and it's really pretty conservative number, because if we can manufacture and use it here in California and not send material off to systems like China where their energy grid is coal-fired, if we can use it here, it's a much cleaner and much greater reduction. Recycling creates 4 to 11 times more jobs in collection and landfilling. The state agency Calvert Recycle did a report on job creation that goes into great detail about what those multipliers are, what the sources for the numbers are. But you think about it, if you go to a landfill, you're going to find a few people looking at the stuff when it lays on the ground, somebody operating a loader, and that's it. You come to our recycling facility, we have over 40 people employed there. Okay? That's just in the processing end. And then if you take that material and put it into manufacturing, you get even more jobs. So we know it creates more jobs than landfilling. And said we can create about 100,000 jobs. Here's where it comes from. The challenge for those of you who want to figure out how to do it is paper. And we have some cardboard mills left in California. There's no newsprint to speak of left. Newsprint's a shrinking market. So we have limited water. We're in a drought. How do we recycle paper? Now it goes to China. They make it into new paper and use it up. We can make the paper here and sell it, but I think there's some real financial hurdles. So what do we do with the paper? Lumber gets burned as fuel, rather than made into plywood and other lumber products. And that's fine. It doesn't go to a landfill, but there's really no offset. It's an offset against the grid power, not saving trees, not keeping trees in the forest, because we're just burning it up and then got to go get more wood to make it dimensional. So this is where the jobs come from. Organics, for those in Neville's program, I think you guys should all have an affinity for that. But this is just processing, recovering and processing the organic material. 13,000 new jobs in California. Somebody's got to apply that. Very different. I use compost, which your Neville does. It's not the same as taking a spreader with pelletized chemical fertilizer and laying it down. Okay? It's just not the same. It's much more hands-on, working it into the soil, and it builds up the soil, and you get healthier soil, and you reduce water consumption, and you avoid the impacts of the chemical fertilizer production. There's a lot of jobs in that. Okay? There's going to be people who specialize, I think, in using the organics that we're going to create here. We're negotiating to put a compost facility at that MRF in Victorville today. I've got a meeting tomorrow morning to look over the deal sheet. And we're going to be creating compost. Hopefully somebody can use it. And I think the people who learn how to use it, learn how to apply it, know the benefits, and can show the benefits to people, you're going to have a leg up. Because that's where the future lies. We're going to have a lot of that material, and it works. It works. I spread compost I've got a lawn. I live in the mountains in Oak Glen. I've got a lawn that needed to be dressed up because we have grandkids coming to play on it. And last week, I spread compost on it. Put down some grass seed, spread compost on it, watered it for a week, and it's beautiful. It went from kind of a arid-looking, semi-arid mountain meadow to a green, beautiful green lawn in less than a week, in 5 days. And it's that compost that releases into it. Okay, so there are jobs and there are opportunities for you. The big thing back in Sacramento now is greenhouse gas. Okay, so the Air Resources Board just updated. They just updated what's called the scoping plan. It's the steps that the ARB will undertake over the next 5 years. The first 5-year update of the scoping plan. We plot our way in. The recycling community plot our way into the first scoping plan. In the second scoping plan, the Air Resources Board and Calvert Recycle developed this waste management sector plan. And so ARB is looking at how do they reduce greenhouse gases by 2020. Calvert Recycle is looking at how do we recycle 75% by 2020. And this plan was the convergence of them. Okay? So, number one, take full ownership. Don't rely on export. Don't just send your stuff off somewhere else and hope you'll find a market for it. Create markets here, create opportunities here, and keep the value and the jobs here. Maximize recycling and diversion. Maximize recycling and diversion. Don't count. Don't play numbers games of trying to calculate recycling rates, but actually keep stuff out of landfills. Incentivize the most beneficial use of waste material. I was responding to an email earlier about some modifications to policies at Cal Recycle, where they've always focused on keeping stuff out of landfills, okay? And now they've got, now they want to address the greenhouse gas issues, but they don't quite know how to do it, So we get these draft policies, and they don't acknowledge the impact of greenhouse gas reduction. For example, how you compost makes a big difference. If you have a big open windrow and you turn that windrow, yeah, you make compost. Okay? If you cover that windrow, you not only reduce the odor emissions and the dust emissions, but you reduce the carbon dioxide emissions because you're not turning as often, and you don't have pockets of methane, so you reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. It's all kept out of the landfill, but how you keep it out has a big impact. So that's what we're just in the front. We're creating all this. We're creating this today because these are new programs. 75% recycling. Nobody's done that. Nobody said that as a hard goal. We're actually measuring it by reduction of disposal, and then add to that this link between greenhouse gas reduction and recycling. Nobody's done that. Okay? So there's great opportunities to jump into this. Sustainability of the waste management infrastructure. Solar-powered compost operations, solar-powered MRFs. Okay, capture methane and use it for fuel collection vehicles. There's a lot of stuff that we can do internally to do a better job. Reduce the volume of waste generated, and that's back to how many planets do we need? How much stuff do we need? Interesting, since 2008, since the recession, numbers haven't come back. Everything dropped about 30%. Disposal dropped about 30%. The recycling numbers, total tons, dropped about 30%. Total material, and it hasn't really come back. So people are a little more cautious, whether it's because they're worried about the environmental impact or they're worried about their pocketbook. I'm guessing it's probably the latter. But you need to make that link. How many pairs of shoes do you need? So we've got $25 million just approved in the new state budget from cap and trade money from greenhouse gas cap and trade money. Cap and trade is basically a method of reducing the emissions from combustion facilities like the cement kilns, and giving them a reduced emission allowance of greenhouse gases over time up to 2020. And then capturing payments for those who exceed their allowances. There's almost $1 billion a year available under the cap and trade program. 25 million going to recycling to be spent for composting and anaerobic digestion and for recycling and base manufacturing. The first round of funding applications went in yesterday for the composting and anaerobic digestion, and they'll go in later this month for recycling base manufacturing, and with the goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but it's also required to keep stuff out of landfill. So I want to just wrap up here to make that link on greenhouse gas and the recycling activities and what we call materials management. So if you've seen greenhouse gas inventories, you see stuff like this, a pie chart that shows how much comes from electrical generation, transportation. Waste is up in here, about 2%. Methane from landfills. It's a stationary emissions view. Okay, it's smokestacks and tailpipes. It's something that's only go out and measure. Okay, but really, what we do is we make stuff and we move stuff around. Transportation. You're going to the store to buy food. Okay? You're driving to work to provide a service, or you're buying products. Okay, that have been manufactured. So if you look at consumption, if you look at what people are actually using and consuming, you get a different view of things. And materials, the goods and food, the goods that we use and the food that we eat, is 42% of emissions associated with the manufacturing. So the emissions occur when you cut down a tree in the forest and you destroy the carbon that's stored in that tree, and then you take the tree and you have energy to pulp it up, and then energy to turn it into paper. All of that energy goes into paper. You do the same thing with mine products, you do the same thing with petroleum products, and it's all the energy that's upstream that gets captured in those products before you even get it. You know. Then you use the product and you get rid of it, and if it's food, it goes into landfill and there's some methane that goes out. But the real impact is upstream. It's how much energy goes into feeding us and providing us with goods and keeping us comfortable. So there's a field called life cycle analysis where you look at inputs, you look at things like energy and materials, and then you take them through the different stages of raw extraction to secondary or primary processing, secondary processing, transportation, distribution, the use of the product, and then at the end of life, what happens to it, and can actually measure the different outputs across the stages of the life of those materials, you know, from raw material through products to end of life. And it's called life cycle analysis, and it gives us a lot of data to begin to look at different ways of doing it. And it's counterintuitive. You know, recyclers hate to have 3 or 4 materials all bundled together, but the best system for residential home insulation is insulated concrete forms using a plastic styrofoam block with concrete and rebar. Okay, it's a recycler's nightmare, but it performs well during the use phase. So life cycle analysis gives you results that sometimes you don't want to know. For recycling, though, generally it shows us that over the life of the product, this whole resource extraction, materials processing, product design, manufacturing, all of that really what leads up to the disposal, and most of the impacts are in those earlier stages. And so when we call this materials management, and so we move away from just this end-of-life focus on recycling into this bigger picture of materials management, and you start to view things very differently. Okay, it's not just how do we recycle and what do we recycle, it's what went into that product to get us there. And that's really where the greenhouse gas impacts are. This is the entree to tying together the climate issues, but they're climate issues and they're energy issues and they're resource issues. So and so I always ask recyclers this, and you know, what's the difference between recycling 1 ton of paper, 1 ton of food, 1 ton of plastic? There's no difference. Right? I mean, in a recycling rate, a recycled ton is a ton. They all are the same. Ton's a ton. Okay? Doesn't matter what it is. Greenhouse gas impact. What's the difference between recycling a ton of paper from a greenhouse gas impact? How many greenhouse gas metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent do you reduce by recycling a ton of wood or a ton of food? And they're all different. They're totally different. I don't know. I kind of have a sense, but I don't know those numbers. And those numbers are standardized numbers. They're life cycle numbers, but it's the early stages even of the life cycle numbers. And so there is no easy answer. There's an easy answer on, you know, what's the difference on recycling a ton, on your recycling rate? A ton's a ton. Doesn't matter what you recycle. The heavier the stuff is, actually the better. But on greenhouse gas, it's a whole new field. Okay, and we got a long way to go. So you guys can get us there.
So John, are you going to be able to stick around for a little while?
Yeah, I'll stay around.
Do you stick around for dinner so they can ask you questions?
Yes.
Then? Or do any, just maybe take one quick question, anything that basically you didn't understand? We're going to do the discussion and stuff over dinner time. So is anything you're like, what the heck does that mean?
What was JPA?
Joint Powers Authority. Joint Powers Authority.
Okay.
That's an interesting one, because how's that set up, real quick? What is that?
Basically, California law says that any local governments can share their common authority. So there's discussion now about forming a joint powers authority to provide law enforcement in the high desert.
Okay.
And so the cities would share their common authority to provide law enforcement. We share our common authorities.
And
Right,
you're
which
you're
we-
based under, you're a special district, that's.
No, we're an authority.
Authority,
We're
so
joint
that's
powers
separate
authority.
from special district.
Yeah, we're a joint
It's a
powers
different
authority.
kind of government structure that allows you to do certain things. So
Yeah.
cities sometimes do these things. In this case, a whole group of cities and other authorities got together,
So
right?
we have one set of bylaws, and each of the local agencies adopted that same set of bylaws. Our board of directors are all elected officials, they have to be elected officials, so we have 8 council members and 1 county supervisor on the board. And because we are exercising the powers of those local governments.
Yeah, yeah, and I would say that most people in the average community have no idea the structure. They know about the city of Apple Valley, but they have no idea about these other structures that are getting basic things done. So Kate's going to talk about another, I don't know if you're a joint powers authority or,
Sure.
yeah,
We're
that
joint
that
powers
manages your
authority.
sewage and that wastewater, and that's Victor Valley Wastewater Authority.
So the way that works is, yeah, we service Apple Valley, Victorville, Hesperia, part of Oro Grande, and Adelanto. So all of your waste comes to us. But we are, all those cities govern us. So we have representatives from each on our board that decide what we do and what we don't do.
But it's much more efficient if we all get together and collaborate on things, is what it boils down to. I think.
Yeah, that was
I love the concept.
When we worked together in 1989, 1990, under AB 939, we had to develop a plan of source prevention, recycling element. And one of the recommendations was we continue to work together on the things that we shared in common. And so that's what we do. We can go off and do things that 1 or 2 communities do, like the recycling facilities here. But generally, we do things that all 9 jurisdictions agree to do in the budget or in other activities.
Why on the list of all the cities is Hesperia not on there under recycling, because they do their own?
Yeah, they have their own, they don't actually separate their recycling. They try to remove the recyclables from the garbage.
Yeah, they
We
have like a
chose to,
conveyor
yeah,
belt
yeah.
system thing. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we have a system to do it, but the material in ours, think if you put paper in with the garbage, it kind of degrades the paper. And those facilities don't get the same value for the material recovery. So we thought it was easy enough for people to put all their dry recycling in one container and let it separate it out and be more cost effective. They think it's easier to get everything and pull out what you can and still recyclable.
All right. Okay. So you guys are in for a merry ride today, because we're gonna go like through all these different areas of how we take care of business and hopefully build ourselves into a sustainable community. So next speaker is going to be Cameron McLeod from California Wilderness Coalition, and I'll have him introduce what they do and why they do it, and also how they do it, because he's also going to be asking you guys to help him. So thanks for coming. There's up in there is a pointer. But as John was discovering, when you hit the pointer, you often hit the forward button or something too.
Don't use your phone.
All right, guys. Like Neville said, I'm Cameron McLeod. I'm the Desert Field Organizer for the California Wilderness Coalition. First, a little history on our organization and then what we do and how we do it. California Wilderness Coalition, we're a statewide organization, we're a nonprofit, and we work to preserve wildlands in California. We work on public lands, so that is, for my outreach here in the desert at least, that's primarily BLM land that's threatened by development, and we work to save wild places that have characteristics of wild wilderness places, and we're trying to keep them from being degraded by development and other threats. So we'll continue on here. Little history on California, on the CWC. Since 1976, we've been empowering local communities to be the voice for wild California. So that involves everything from coming and speaking at a local school like this. We also make appearances at town hall meetings. We work with local business owners, other prestigious community members, all the way up to county board of supervisors, and in between the city council, other local, and then all the way up to state officials, but we start on the ground level with local communities. We start with empowering people and trying to convey to them the value of their native land or their wild lands in their own backyards. We do, as it said, second point, we specialize in the soup and nuts of the wilderness bills. That's the field checking. That's a very practical, grassroots and boots on the ground, hands-on approach to proposing a bill or proposing an area for designation as wilderness. We start by going and checking an area ourselves. That's something I have a kind of extensive background with Cal Wild. Before I was hired on full-time, when I was interning with them, I did a lot of driving out to the areas that we'd go propose. I would start by assessing an area, looking for wilderness characteristics. I'll talk more about that later. But anyways, Cal Wild, we start from the ground up and we go and assess everything from the ground level that we're going to propose. We don't shoot blindly or anything like that. We make sure we go and examine something first off. So we're hands-on from the ground level approach. So anyways, real quick, wilderness is kind of a broad term, and does anybody know or have a preconceived notion of what wilderness is? Did anybody? Well, it might be cheating there. But anyone in the class here, I mean, it's kind of a flowery word with a broad description. For our terms and purposes, I'll define it. But did anybody else have a preconceived notion?
Open space, wide open.
Things as they're supposed to be.
Okay. Quite refreshing. Okay, I'll be completely honest. Anyway, but like you said, wide open space, untouched land, things as they are supposed to be. We're going to get a little more flowery here, or seemingly flowery. However, this is language that's actually used by administration and government. But wilderness is a place that is quote unquote untrammeled by man, a place that is where man himself is only a visitor, and also is a place that wilderness for these purposes also. That's a technical term that is used when referring to a federal designation. Wilderness is the highest form of federal protection that you can use as a federal designation to preserve a piece of land. So,
Can you repeat that last little word?
about wilderness?
Protecting it,
Yeah,
the highest what?
wilderness is the highest form of federal designation that you can use to protect land. So I'll get more on this later. But when you designate a piece of land as wilderness, it takes an act of Congress to do so. So it's a federal protection on a piece of public land that protects it from, gives it, like I said, the highest level of protection that you can find. So anyways, I'll elaborate more on this later. Yes?
We said that that's the title that has to be awarded to them.
I'm sorry?
It has to awarded to wilderness, like their criteria you're talking about.
Yeah, there are characteristics of wilderness land, and I'll get into that later. But yes, it is a title. Like there's an area of land. Wilderness would be as opposed to national forest or multiple use land or something like that. The wilderness falls along that same sort of designation. So, anyways, the U.S. was the first country to start protecting the lands with wilderness characteristics to the level of wilderness. That was in 1964 was when the Wilderness Act was passed, and this piece of legislation stands still to this day in place as the governing federal statute that allows lands to be proposed or to be protected at this level. So, brief history on wilderness here. So I'm working off two different sets of notes. I'm sure everybody here has heard the name John Muir. John Muir was, a visionary and a pre-revolutionary man in his own time, still to this day. But it was his vision that started the movement in the United States, at least, the call for a need to preserve our wild places. He saw the degradation of places such as Yellowstone and Yosemite Valley, and stood to fight it and make sure that there were wild places preserved. So along this in the 1800s, this period of time, that whole thing started off. A couple other people who were highly influential, Bob Marshall, there's a quote there, but early in the 1900s, when we saw wilderness land start to be degraded and starting to see wild places slip away. So a little further history there if you guys are curious to investigate. But anyway, this is what started what led up to the Wilderness Act in 1964, which, as I said, is still the defining piece of legislature that allows for federal designation of the preservation of wild places. So, a little more here on what wilderness is. Wilderness, as I said before, is public land that is preserved by the federal government, or designated by the federal government as a wild place that, by the way, is pro-recreation. We'll throw that out there. That's a misconception about wilderness land. A lot of times, people get the idea when a place gets designated as wilderness, it's closed off forever, it's gone, we can't touch it. That's not the case, and that is something that our organization fights on the daily, is trying to communicate to people that when you designate a place as a wilderness area, it's preserving public land for the public, right? And it's not allowing it to be degraded into some other use. So opportunities that are made available by designating a piece of land as wilderness include hiking, horseback riding, camping, fishing, hunting, rock climbing, scientific research, bird watching, wildflower viewing, all kinds of stuff. The big stipulations on a piece of wilderness land, what it doesn't allow is it does not allow you to have a motorized vehicle or mechanical things like mountain bikes in the land. That's not to say that there isn't vehicular access to a lot of these places, but what we'll do a lot of times is what's called cherry stem, a designated route into a wilderness area, and then surrounding the route will be protected as wilderness where you can't have a vehicle. But it's basically access by foot, and it's a rural area that is, untouched and preserved in all of its natural value. Once again, bringing in a little more of the flowery definitions there. Wilderness is the land that was, wild lands beyond the frontier, lands that shape the growth of our nation and the character of its people. And the land that is, it's a rare wild place where one can retreat from civilization, reconnect with the earth, find healing and meaning and significance. So it's a place that provides an opportunity for solitude, unique recreation, a place to get away from it all, which I'm sure everybody can agree. Urbanization has really taken a toll on this earth, and if we don't preserve wild places to go, we're not going to have any. And I'd much rather have a place to go retreat than be confined to a concrete jungle. So, anyway. As I said before, it's the quote you have there about area that's untrammeled by man himself as a visitor, and undeveloped federal land retaining its primeval character and influence without permanent improvements or human habitation. So, go with that a little bit already. Okay, so moving on here is on how Cal Wild finds a piece of land eligible to designate as wilderness. Like I said, we start from the ground up with field checking. So this is a proposed wilderness area, Sleep View proposed wilderness. This was before my time with Cal Wild. However, I did a lot of work on a lot of different areas, just under 1 million acres of my own that I surveyed myself. We went through a process like this. So we start with a proposed wilderness area by looking at DAG maps, as you can see here, the land in yellow is BLM land, the land in blue is state land, and then white is private land. And we propose a wilderness area shown by the red boundaries here. And we'll start with the field checking. Access the area by normally the boundaries on the outside would be a designated route that would encompass an area and a certain amount of acreage. So first, obviously, access the area. A lot of the times these designated routes are rugged four-wheel drive only routes, so it takes a little bit to go and survey and get up in there, but we essentially drive the perimeter of an area, meanwhile documenting any type of wilderness characteristics that we might find. So that would include wildlife, that would include scenic views, wildflowers, anything that would provide an opportunity for outdoor recreation. So if you've got a body of water or a wash or something like that, that would be documented as well. And then also, if we saw something either that was a designated route, or what would appear to be a designated route going into the area, or from an aerial photograph we could see something that appeared to be a disturbed portion of the land. Initially, what we do is what's called cherry stemming, which I mentioned earlier, which is where you take and carve out a portion of a proposed wilderness area, either like a route or some sort of disturbance. And then those would be an area of extra interest for us to check out. So, for example, in my own field work, you see something like this right here, which is a little caveat that they've taken out of the proposed wilderness. Perhaps, let's say, that was seen as an area of land that looked to be disturbed. I found some of these things in the proposed wilderness areas that I surveyed were turned out to be an old piece of agricultural land or something that was plowed perhaps a long time ago, or maybe there's some sort of deed or something or other that was found during when other research was being done to the land. However, as you can see here, after the boots on the ground assessment, the green portions are proposed additional wilderness. So that land was then surveyed, assessed, and deemed still to be eligible for wilderness and could be reintroduced to the bill. Also, you'll note that on these dotted red lines there, those are designated routes. Those would be cherry stemmed out of a wilderness bill as well. So you have your proposed wilderness area, However, you still have the right to drive through it so long as you're remaining on a designated route and respecting, you know, what's a legally open route and not degrading the landscape. Yes?
So you don't create your own roads to try and find these wilderness areas?
No, we are working 100% on legally or currently designated BLM routes. So no traversing or trailblazing the rest of these. Something else that we do, if we have a route that was apparently on a BLM DAG map or something like that, DAG is Desert Access Guide. So if you had something that appeared to be a legally open route or is at least indicated as a legally open route and we couldn't find it, then we would note that as well. You can see here, you can see the surveyor's notes, can't find this, and you know, delete this cherry stem. So obviously there were areas of interest. You can see a route going down here, and if they didn't exist on the ground, you know, there's no need to open it up or go ahead and reblaze it, if you will. Anyway, so that's how we start. What else I have here? So start from the ground up, do a survey and document wilderness characteristics of the land. This used to be done with a camera and a GPS. When I was doing it more recently, we were using an iPad and GPS, you know, photo type of technology. But you know, we take a bunch of photos of the place and document wilderness characteristics, and then we'd be able to overlay this with Google Earth or similar mapping type technology with all the photographs around the different areas of the land, and then from there make a report stating why we found a piece of land eligible for wilderness designation. This is a finished draft or a final draft of a designated wilderness, or excuse me, a proposed wilderness area. So you can see here there's already existing wilderness areas and state parks and similar type of things here. And then in the orange would be the finalized product of a proposed wilderness area with the appropriate cherry stems. You can see going through it to make sure that the designated routes are left open, other things like that, or make sure that what was proposed was actually relevant and eligible. Okay, so tying this into relevance with the current issues. If you guys haven't heard of the DRECP, I suggest you do a little homework here. But this DRECP is one of the issues that's facing California's deserts right now. It's what I work on primarily. It's my area of focus within the California Wilderness Coalition. It stands for the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan, and it is the attempt at mapping out the renewable energy projects that are proposed to go to California's deserts that were mandated by Governor Schwarzenegger's executive order, which deemed that the state needed to be 33% renewable, or California's electricity needed to be 33% renewable by 2020. There's an area of land that's 22.5 million acres in size that encompasses, that's focused in the California desert here, and it's a lot of these projects, it's primarily solar projects, also encompasses some wind and geothermal projects. A lot of the areas where they're proposing to do this are either adjacent to existing wilderness areas, or they're on areas of land that are lands of wilderness characteristics. Cal Wild's looking at about 2 million acres right now. That was the survey work that I did leading up to this, that are threatened by development, and the places that stand to be degraded. They look like this. They're pristine, beautiful areas that don't stand to lose. So anyway, the point to take home here, you know, the California desert are sensitive. It's full of sensitive ecosystems that are really made. It taken tens of thousands of years to develop, and they're now in an apex where the biodiversity is completely unbelievable. It's so wide and vast. You know, leaves me speechless. But these are areas that are currently threatened. You know, and also my organization is making a stand that they're not suitable for development. We're not, well, put it out there right now, we're not anti-green energy, we're not anti-renewables. However, we are saying that there is an appropriate place to place them, and that lands like these with wilderness characteristics deserve to be preserved and, you know, left for the value that they have of, you know, their own natural beauty and recreational opportunities. There's a photo of Kingston Range in spring and wildflowers. Anyways, if a renewable energy project were to go in there, flat piece of land like that, you know, you have to come in, you have to grade it, possibly bulldoze it, and you lose the entire layer of desert pavement, and that's not something that's going to come back on a human time scale. That's something that restores on a geologic time scale. So essentially, we're never going to see it again, and that's not something we afford to lose. Anyway, A lot of these areas are also habitat for threatened and endangered species such as the desert tortoise, bighorn sheep, there's desert mule deer out there. So along the list of birds and stuff, there's things like you know, the Armagosa River, there's a couple different species of fish there. Threatened. I mean, there's niche species that are only found in these areas, which is why we need to preserve them where they are, because they don't exist anywhere else. Anyway, a couple more shots here of different areas that are threatened and that are we are proposing as wilderness areas in this bill. Anyway, our solution to this also, I mean, there's also areas in the desert that are under the DRECP that are disturbed agricultural land, which, you know, we're not against developing those as renewable energy projects. And also, as Neville mentioned earlier, there's the alternative of doing solar panels and other renewable energy on a local scale, as opposed, and you know, rooftop type things, as opposed to utility scale. The other problem with a lot of this type of development, just to, you know, this is, well, I'm not going to take a stance on it either way, but just put a bug in your head here. You know, a utility company, when they develop something like this, when they develop a site for renewable energy, you know, they don't make their money on how much of the utility they sell to you. And also take note that most of the power that's going to be generated by these sites is going to be shipped to the urban areas, you know, Los Angeles, Orange County, the places with the higher population densities. The money to be made there, or what they charge you for, is how far they transport the resource. So, I'll leave you with that as something to think about, and possibly why there's opposition to you know, more localized projects. But anyway, that's what I've got. That's what I do for Cal Wild. I work on the DRECP, and if there's any further questions, I'll be available later today. And if you guys would like to get involved, I can't stress enough, please, www.calwild.org. You can look us up, and we can send out wilderness alerts. You can become a member of Cal Wild, and we also send out news about different campaigns, and when we need letters of support being written to congressmen, or when we need them being written to, you know, county board of supervisors, other representatives. So please be in touch, get involved, and we'd be happy to have your support. Thank you.
Website again?
Oh, www.calwild.org.
All right, cool. Thank you very much, Ben. So I have a real quick question, is how, with all the work going on, I know you're super active out here, it seems like this is a really good place for students to engage that want to get involved in the practice of sustainable development, is what I would call, or conservation. So how easy is it for somebody to join Cal Wild and or just become a volunteer as a student to get that critical experience out in the field?
Well, to join Cal Wild, I mean,
Yeah.
go to our website, sign up.
Yeah.
And we're, you know, like I said, we have the e-alerts, the email things, you know, sort of a call to action thing. If you want to get involved, by all means, you know, we'll let you know. That's easy to do. As far as, you know, the being active in the field.
Sort of field experience, yeah.
The field experience.
Yeah.
Well, I started as an intern with Cal Wild, and that was through Monica, my supervisor, who was a professor of mine at the time, who offered me the internship. I'm not currently aware of any more intern opportunities.
Yeah.
We've concluded our surveying for this first round, this draft of the RECP.
Yeah.
That may become available further on, but I would once again recommend staying in touch with Cal Wild, shoot them an email, and see what see what comes back. But that's farther up the flagpole than me.
Okay, cool. Got any other quick questions for are you able to stick around, Cameron?
Yes, I am.
Okay, cool.
Is Juniper Flats on your area to check and
Yes.
Right.
I guess her question kind of confused me. So you're trying to protect land that's already like forestry and?
BLM, well, my particular work on the DRECP is BLM land, so that's federal. But we're currently trying to protect land that is public BLM land, you know, multiple use land would be the correct term. And we're trying to get that designated with, you know, federal legislation from the federal level to be preserved as a wilderness area is what we're trying to do for my particular thing, my particular area of focus. Cal Wild's also got other campaigns. We've got campaigns all over the state. We work in the northern part of the state. We've got campaigns on the central coast. My supervisor is working extensively on Dianne Feinstein's. She worked on the 1994 bill for the California Desert Protection Act and is working again on Feinstein's current bill, which is a lot bigger than the DRECP. It encompasses just a little more, almost just under 1 million acres. But that's the California Desert Conservation and Recreation Act. So my own particular niche is working on BLM land. However, we work on all kinds of public land throughout the state.
I've got another question. What about the actual Mojave River, the sandbar that runs? Because that's a very, very ancient trail.
It is.
Sandbar, is that protected at all?
That, I believe, and Evan, you might have to help me out on this one, I believe that's encompassed in the Mojave, in Feinstein's current piece of legislation that she's working on. I don't believe that's involved with the DRECP. I could double check and get back to you on that, but I believe that's in
You're talking about the Mojave
The
Road?
Mojave River, the actual sand.
The actual course of the Mojave River, okay.
Yeah, the sandbar, 'cause it's a very ancient trail. I used to hike it a lot. I live near there. I still kind of do. But when you're in that, when you're on the river, it seems like it's untouched. It's very ancient. The Indians, people used to travel that, and pioneers used to use it as a marking for the desert to, find their way down, get the home pass and stuff. But it's an ancient area, and it would be kind of cool to have that.
Well, we
It's
do
a
have
very, very old
Jeff
river.
Charles is here from BLM, so we're going to have him talk. But as far as I understand, there is no specific agency that is in charge of that. Public land often stretches out into the river, but there's a number of groups. When we go on our field trip down on the lower Mojave next time, we'll be stopping in the Resource Conservation District that I serve on, and Mojave Water Agency, who manages the water underneath that, that's the key corridor for them, have, for example, things like a massive invasive weed project to remove tamarisk and other things like that. So there's groups working on different things. As far as keeping that route open, and designating the OHV thing, there's various ways that designating that it can be used properly for OHV, appropriately for OHV. I'm not sure who's in charge of that, various jurisdictions. For example, one way we can bring attention to that is to do the Mojave Desert Walk that would go down the river from here all the way down to Victorville. So it's kind of an open season thing, but maybe somebody else has better information. Probably John might have even some information on that. So that's a good question. That's a piece of land that's very important, critical, without any particular agency sort of managing in its totality. Which, okay, cool. Good question. I hadn't actually even thought of that before. Thank you very much, Cameron. So what we could do, we're running pretty well in terms of time. You want to take a 10-minute bathroom break, and then we can load up the last 2 PowerPoints. And then if it's okay with Kate, I was actually thinking of have Jeff go next because he's with. Huh? Yeah, exactly. You could come. Yeah, exactly. So Jeff would go next. Is that all right with you, Kate? You've got time? Okay. Okay. Yeah, as I was doing that, I was thinking, well, I should have thought of that. That would have been better order. Yeah.
I was trying not to say anything.
All right. Okay. Awesome. So let's take a 10-minute break. Come back at 4:45. For folks that are speaking.